You just pressed play on the Last Breath Hunt Cast, home of the Huntroversy. We're here to entertain, educate, and engage. And in case you didn't know, you only live once. But if you do it right, once is enough. Don't waste it. All right, we are live. Welcome to episode number 108 of the Last Breath Hunt Cast, home of the Huntroversy. Per episode 107, we are going to continue on with last week's conversation, which was a Huntroversy with our guest Pete Gentry, one of our buddies from Louisiana who came up from the launch party. And before we dive into that, we just wanted to note that this podcast is presented by Badlands Gear. You can check them out on badlandsgear.com. And we have a really nice 30% discount code if you're looking to get into something real quick here before season. Most states have a couple months before the season actually opens up for them. And this podcast is also presented by Outdoor Edge Gear. We have a nice 25% discount code for any of you guys that are joining the Last Breath Inner Circle, which is our Facebook group. So you guys can hop in there and take advantage of both of those because that is for you. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it. Last week, we discussed what the hardest states were to whitetail hunt, and we looked at a specific study that took a gander at the number of deer harvested and the number of licenses purchased in that state. And there were a couple of states that were to be expected on the list. States with lower deer density typically made the list because where there is lower deer density, it is obviously a little bit more challenging to locate and find deer. Whereas the number one state, according to this particular survey that Pete and I took a look at, was all about the ratio between license sales and deer harvests. So Iowa, surprisingly, I would not have guessed that, was the number one, according to this particular study, hardest place to hunt, simply because the number of deer harvested in Iowa was the exact same or roughly close to a 1-to-1 ratio with the number of licenses being purchased, which means every hunter in Iowa kills roughly one deer per year. And there were other states that were not too far off from that. There were some states on the list that were a little bit unexpected, but today we're going to look at some different factors at what plays into being the hardest state to whitetail hunt in the United States beyond just license sales to deer harvest ratios. So we're going to go ahead and give Pete a call here.
Hello.
You got me loud and clear, buddy?
Loud and clear, buddy.
All
right. How about me?
Here we go. That's perfect. I got you good up here. And for those of you that didn't listen to episode 107 right now, who are you and who is speaking?
I'm Pete Gentry.
Where are you from, brother?
I am from the giant deer growing state of Louisiana.
Right up there with Iowa, really. I mean, most people think it's like Iowa 1, Louisiana 2, but lots of people will argue that Louisiana is a little bit better.
For sure. I mean, we're definitely better than Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think so, anyway.
Yeah, the other day I read that Wisconsin was at the very bottom of the list for Boone and Crockett entries, so Louisiana definitely takes the number one spot home for that. So I already told everybody that we were going on with part 2 of the What is the Hardest State to Whitetail Hunt episode, and in episode 107 we kind of broke down the top 15 per the research that we found, and it was simply equating the number of licenses purchased in the state and the number of deer harvested. So the closer to a 1-to-1 ratio, according to the article, that was the more pressured. And I don't know if we agreed on that necessarily, if we necessarily thought that 1-to-1 ratio specifically meant pressure, because when I think of pressure, I think of more factors than just license sales to deer ratio. In my opinion, after thinking about this for about a week, I don't know where you sit on it. We'll take your thoughts, but I was thinking about Iowa, right? Being right there at the top at a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning, the number of licenses sold and the number of deer harvested were roughly equal. So that way, when the number of deer divided by the number of licenses roughly came out at 1.0. And I was almost thinking to myself, wouldn't that imply that I would be the easiest state to kill a deer in Isn't that what that number suggests? What are your thoughts on that?
That was something that I was actually talking to my dad about it. He listened to the podcast, and me and him were discussing it, and he said, yeah, that means there's more hunters, but there's also equal number of harvests to hunters. So isn't that kind of the goal? 100%, 100% success is 100% success, right?
Right, yeah.
So, but I do understand it from a pressure, quote unquote, side. You get that many hunters in an area, it definitely will become more difficult to probably target a specific deer or a specific area.
Sure. The way I took it as was kind of, on the opposite end of the coin was if everybody in Iowa is going out and hunting, and everybody in Iowa is going out and being successful in killing a deer, and we're not just talking about a buck here, we're talking about does, yearlings, fawns, etc. I don't know. I don't know where I sit on that. I felt a little bit uneasy about the research that we discovered and kind of went over in episode 107 last week, because I was expecting that, in my opinion, I thought that the larger the ratio, the further distance away it was from 1.0. I thought that to be a more rigorous state. For example, I kind of looked at my state, Michigan, right? At the beginning of the last podcast, we decided, let's go ahead and, off the cuff, before we get into the research, talk about what we think are the hardest states. You named Florida, and Florida's
Right.
actually on the research that we're going to go through today. I named Michigan. Michigan was not on last week's list. However, I looked up, there's nearly 600,000 licenses sold in Michigan, and only about half of those people are killing deer. So that, that is not even close to the number that Iowa is putting up. 100% of the hunters statistically in Iowa are killing a deer every year, where only half the hunters in Michigan are killing a deer. So that, to me, I didn't know if the article could have been, titled a little bit differently, but that would have been my only critique of that. It's just kind of, I think the data, if you take it for pressure, could be a little bit misleading, just because when people think of Iowa, they think of a deer hunting, mecca, and rightfully so. They grow giant bucks. The state population, relatively speaking, in comparison to Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, the state population is quite low. The number of licenses sold there is lower due to the fact that the DNR restricts non-resident tag buying. I just thought it was all kind of really interesting, especially Iowa being at the top of that list, and I'm really excited to get into today's article that we found, which is going to take us through a couple of different factors. So lots of good statistics here uncovered by this one, and we both have it covered, pulled up rather, right now, and we're going to go ahead and go through it. So as all good researchers do, we got to cite our source, Pete. So where does this bad boy come from?
This one comes from Wide Open Spaces. It was written in October of 2019, so relatively recent.
Yep, still pretty relevant, I would say.
Right, and it was just written by one of their staff writers.
Yep.
They don't say which one. But,
yeah. So you can find the article that we're going to kind of reference here and go and dig into by just simply Googling the 5 worst states for deer hunting and then choosing the Wide Open Spaces one. There's a nice image of like an 8-point velvet buck at the top of the article. And like Pete said, it was written in October 2019. So let's go ahead and get into number 5. So go ahead, Pete. What's number 5?
Number 5. Florida.
When I read this article, I was like, son of a bitch, Pete, you're right. He got it. He got it. His pick was on there.
Yep. But the data that this article looks at is, herd numbers if they're on an incline or a decline, harvest numbers, so on and so forth. So even though Florida, it says Florida is a popular state for deer hunting, but herd numbers are declining faster in Florida than almost any state from 2011 to 2015, the Sunshine State averaged 73,802 harvested bucks per year, but only recorded 57,403 in 2016. So that's a 22% decline, which is the worst of any state.
And I wonder why specifically that decline has happened, but, that is obviously alarming. For a Florida resident, for anybody that's considering going and hunting Florida, if the number of, specifically they're looking at buck harvests here, is dropping by, nearly 20,000, I mean, that is a substantial amount. And that really, really is alarming to, somebody like us. And I thought the most interesting thing of this article is that the last article we examined in episode 107 took a look at the license sales and deer harvest numbers and compared them in a ratio. And the closer they were to 1.0, the higher they were on the list. But this one kind of looks at a variety of different factors, and the factor plaguing Florida the most is, this big decline, this large gap and decrease in bucks harvested. And you have some more information that we're looking at here, so go ahead and keep going.
It already said it's 22% decline, worst of any state. And see, this was something that I kind of alluded to in my points of selecting Florida as the toughest state to hunt whitetails. Is the total herd is spread extremely thin. Hunters in Florida only shot 1.1 antlered deer per square mile, which is the second worst to Oklahoma, which, again, you're kind of dealing with the same thing. Habitat's going to be so spread in Florida. Marshland doesn't hold deer as well as people think. Coming from Louisiana, the swamps and everything, yeah, sure, everybody pictures, a swamp donkey, big, mature buck living around a swamp. There's not ample food, in the low-lying areas. And I'm sure Florida's the same way. I wonder how much of the decline to Florida's deer population could be directly correlated to hurricanes.
Right, yeah. That's a great point to mention. I wonder if, the amount of water simply on the ground that's been pouring down in this time, kind of analyzed by the article. So it said from 2011 to 15, Florida averaged about 75,000 bucks, where 55-ish thousand were harvested in 2016. So I wonder if in those particular years, 11 to 15, Florida just sustained less hurricanes, and in that following year, in 16, maybe that was just a really, really wet year for them, and just kind of spread the deer out.
I actually pulled up the National Hurricane Center's statistics. 2011 Hurricane Irene, which was it wasn't a super strong hurricane. You had Hurricane Sandy, which everybody knows of, the one, that's the one that wound up circling back out into the Atlantic and hitting New York. But it originally hit Florida. 15, there's the one right there. Hurricane Joaquin and Patricia were October of 2015. And then 16, Hurricane Matthew, which Matthew was that's the one that did damage to NASA because the eye of it passed straight over Cape Canaveral, 107 mile an hour winds. So in those years that they saw the decline begin, they did have a few major storms.
That's a really good underlying factor. And I, as a person in Illinois, I know the deer harvest numbers were down for the last several years. EHD and CWD have played a large factor, particularly up here in Illinois, with the decline in harvest numbers. And I wouldn't suspect Florida of having a large, ample amount of EHD breakout, just because the readily available amount of fresh water down there.
Right.
That's flowing in the rivers and things like that through the swamps, etc. So that's a really interesting point that you bring up about the number of hurricanes. And digging into this article a little more, the 1.1 antlered deer per square mile, and we're not even talking antlers with that, Pete. We're not even talking, 2 points on one side or 3 or 4 points on one side. That's just simply, it could have been a button buck. It could have been any legal antler. In Illinois,
Right.
I think it's 4 or 5 inches or longer is considered a legal antler point when it pertains to a deer with only 2 points, a button buck or a spike. So
Right.
that's pretty interesting. And it says here it's the second worst in the southeast region for your ratio of deer killed per square mile. And in front of that is only Oklahoma, which was a 0.9 bucks per square mile. And if you would have told me Oklahoma, I would have said, no way, that doesn't make any sense. Because I feel like Oklahoma is really coming up strong as a sleeper state, just from the things. I don't know if you see the same kind of things on the internet during deer season particularly, but I see a lot of good bucks coming out of Oklahoma. I mean, there was that giant buck that Cody and Ryan talked about that got shot in Oklahoma that could be a new potential state record, and I see a lot of nice bucks come out of Oklahoma, so I was not expecting to see that here, but let's go on to number 4. So what do you got for number 4?
Number 4 is this is one I kind of read ahead to see how many we're going to share from the last article to this one. Number 4 is one that's shared, and it's New Hampshire. You can make the case for any of the smaller New England states, which we had that conversation last week. Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire all harvested fewer than 10,000 bucks in 2000 in 2016. However, New Hampshire was the only one besides Rhode Island that didn't see significant improvement from its 2011 to 2015 average to its 2016 harvest, which is a total buck harvest of 6,629. It actually dropped from its average, which sat at 6,655.
So this is an interesting parallel because Florida, is specifically talking about the large dip of harvest numbers and the density per square mile of deer harvested, where this is saying you can kind of take any of those states that are really, really teeny tiny up there in the Northeast and make a case for them. Just like our list we saw last week, there was a lot of New England states on our list that we examined in episode 107 last week, where I think the gist of those states being on that particular case study that we examined there, Pete, I'm sure you would agree with me, was just due to the lack of deer population because the size of the state is so small. There's just not a whole lot of deer there to be harvested. Whereas this one is saying, yes, we agree with that. There's 5 or 6 that you could say that about, but New Hampshire was the only one of those small states that, the harvest numbers got worse. So I think that's interesting that, like I said, there's a lot of really good data in this article as well. What are your thoughts on this one, Pete?
I guess it makes sense in a way, but it says it's the only state that didn't see significant improvement, and I'm trying to see. I was trying to see if I could maybe get lucky and find the data, but I can't quick enough. But it goes to show, because we talked about Connecticut and even Rhode Island a little bit last week, a little bit more in depth than some of the other states, which was, though they're small, looking at records, there's still good deer that come from those states, almost annually.
Yep.
And for New Hampshire to be the one state who saw its average number of bucks drop off, is that a case of people no longer hunting New Hampshire, or are there more hunters but fewer deer?
Or was there, potentially a new DNR bylaw introduced in New Hampshire around that time?
Right.
Over the last 3 or 4 years in Illinois, some new legislation has happened with crossbow hunting that has caused the amount of bow kills, it's considered a bow kill, to rise substantially. So I wonder if something similar like that happened in New Hampshire, where maybe they leapt from being like a $2 state to a $1 state, or a $3 state to a $2 state, because there are several states in the United States where you can kill quite a few bucks. The Carolinas in particular, I know that the bag limits out there are pretty freaking generous for bucks, particularly, just because I've looked it up a couple times, because I would like to go and kill a velvet buck one day.
Right. Right.
But so I wonder if that's maybe a DNR imposed drop, or what that blip on New Hampshire's decline was about. So that was an interesting state. I expected there to be a few New England states on this one, so I'm happy to see one here sitting at number 4. I thought the most interesting one of this particular study, though, is the one that we're about to talk about, Pete.
Yeah.
The one that was the most intriguing to me is here at number 3. So I think we could spend quite a long time talking about this one, so let's go ahead and get into it.
You want to take this one, or are you giving it to me?
Oh, no, you keep taking them. I'm here. Okay. I'm here listening to you. You're good.
Number 3, and I'm just like you. This was the shocker. Kind of like how Iowa was last week. Wisconsin, which we've already said, this time and last time, that Wisconsin, is the top-ranking Boone and Crockett registry state.
Mm-hmm.
And the article says, many monster bucks have been dropped in Wisconsin over the years, but the numbers aren't all that great. Well, it's easily one of the most popular deer hunting states in the country. The deer that fall aren't always big bucks. In 2016, only 16% of the deer harvested were at least 3.5 years old. Only Tennessee has a percentage that low. To make it even worse, 65% of the bucks harvested in Wisconsin in 2016 were yearlings.
So total 180. So we've got Florida, which is saying we've got a large drop in harvested bucks per year, a huge drop, 20,000 deer. We've got New Hampshire, which amongst other small New England states suffered a drop, but Wisconsin is in here for a different reason. It's in here for specifically because of the fact that the majority of the bucks harvested, overwhelming majority, were those 1, 2, 3-year-old bucks or younger, even yearling bucks. I mean, I can imagine that, it says in 2016, only 16% of the deer harvested were at least 3.5 years old. I mean, so of those 16%, how many of those were 3-year-olds? How many were 4? How many are 5, 6, etc.? Right. And that's it's hard to grow big bucks in a state where that is occurring. 84% of the deer killed, that means in that particular year, were 2.5 or less. Right. Lots of yearlings. So 65 of those being yearlings. I don't know. I feel like I really want to talk to a person from Wisconsin now and kind of get their 2 cents, because I was not expecting Wisconsin to be on this list at all.
No, I wasn't.
I see personally Wisconsin as being like a top, certainly in a top 8, arguably a top 4 state for whitetail hunting for sure. And right. The deer hunting heritage is so deep in Wisconsin, and as well as it is in Michigan. I see them as being the number 1 and 2. Tradition is king. Those backwoodsy big deer camps, deer drives. Hunting is a family affair. It's a group affair. I see Wisconsin as being that rich in history, and I was shocked to see them on the list. But with that many bucks being shot that are immature, I could see why it's on this article for being a really tough state to shoot a buck that is mature. That's the key. So there's a little bit more on this article. It says, it's worth mentioning Wisconsin harvested 156,000 bucks last year, which is the second most in the Midwest region, behind only Michigan, which registered 195,000 bucks. So there were a ton of bucks harvested. However,
65% of them
right,
were
yeah,
yearlings.
yep, exactly. So it'd be pretty hard from a trophy hunting aspect when we're looking at Wisconsin, specifically this data. I don't know if it's got any better in the last 4 or 5 years since this study was done, but it'd be pretty tough to target a mature buck when that many deer were getting smacked so young, so early. So,
right. How many mature deer are left at that point?
Right, exactly.
That becomes the kind of the elephant in the room of it, as somebody from our perspective that hunts. Yeah, sure, we hunt deer, but we typically hunt the deer, a specific deer, or maybe a handful if we're lucky and we have a good year of bucks coming through, whether it be early season, peak rut, slightly post rut, and for y'all, getting into the the latter parts of the season, y'all are focusing food sources. So from our perspective, it's very difficult to stand on any type of ground of, yep, we hunt mature deer and that's what we chase, that's what we enjoy chasing. It's the chase that so many of us are addicted to. Whenever at 65%, that's 65% of the bucks that were there that year that we'll never see reach maturity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
and I think all of these technically, all of these states that are on this list as well could be pretty subjective. I mean, to a guy from Florida or New Hampshire, like we've been talking about, where the deer density is low, the herd is smaller, I mean, shoot, they'd probably be chomping at the bit to hunt Wisconsin, where last year in Wisconsin, it's saying, 157,000 bucks were killed, where in Florida, 55,000 bucks are being killed. I mean, that's 3 times the amount, and that's not even including doe numbers, which I'm sure are, in there as well, heavily outweighing Florida. So I feel like it's definitely an interesting parallel between all of these articles that are here. So the next one on our list is coming in at number 2.
Another one that was shared last week as well is Maine, which I kind of done a little research into it, before we recorded last week's, but narrowing the worst deer hunting states to only 5 is a tall order. However, Maine takes the place pretty easily. In 2016, Maine hunters only shot half or 0.5 bucks per square mile, which is the worst in the whole Northeast region. And Maine only harvested, that's only harvested a total of 16,711 bucks in 2016, which is more than it was able to do in 2014 or 2015, but still very low. Maine also had the lowest antlerless harvest per square mile at only 0.2 deer.
Whoa.
So there's just not many deer killed in Maine, period.
That's shocking too. When I think of PSM measurements, per square mile, I'm thinking of a section, 640 acres in Illinois. And right. I'm thinking of a big country block, that's out in the middle of nowhere. And, typically on a country block, there could be, there could be 15 to 50 properties being split up in that country mile. You might be lucky and be a fortunate person to hunt and maintain and manage an entire section by yourself, but that is really not the case in Illinois. Most of the parcels we have are smaller, highly developed with agriculture and, gerrymandered pretty interestingly. So when I think of a square mile in Illinois, I think, there could, on any given section in Illinois during a gun season, during general bow season, there could be 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10, 15 deer shot off of a country mile,
Right.
Whereas when I think of half a buck per per square mile in Maine, I mean, that number is just shockingly low. I thought Florida sounded bad at 1.1 per square mile, but the fact that Maine is in here at half per square mile, that's just, I mean, shit, Pete. That means that every single square mile in Maine, only 1 out of every 2 square miles is even getting a deer killed.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, that amount of, land and stuff, and I've never personally been to Maine, but when you kind of look on Google Earth at Maine, it looks like it's fairly wooded, and majority of the state is undeveloped. There's a lot of beautiful wilderness kind of when I'm thumbing through here on my computer, but that's a pretty shockingly low ratio. So what are your thoughts on this one?
I'm like you. I mean, I remember, last week whenever we were talking, I remember, thinking, Maine's a huge, big wood state. Yeah, sure, you have the coastlands and everything, but still, you look at Maine as a heavily wooded state. Getting up toward some of the Canadian national forests that meet up with it. So to me, it was okay. Yeah, I get it. And now reading this, I mean, it's dumbfounding because I look at Louisiana, because perspective is a matter of your own experience, and I think of me and the neighboring properties of the family land that I hunt. It's just over a square mile, and every year, there's probably typically I kill 1 mature buck. My cousin to the north kills 1. My cousin to the west kills 1. The group straight northwest from me kills 3 or 4. There's, and even then, we'll all get together and we'll talk about, man, this year was kind of a shitty year. We had trouble, getting more than 1 mature buck coming in or whatever. And to read Maine, I mean, what you're saying about, a square mile, there's a lot of ground in a square mile. There is, you especially you look at, your home state, there's metric tons of deer, I would argue, in the average square mile in Illinois.
Yes, I would agree with, I would agree with that. It kind of varies by mile, how much agriculture is making up that mile. But yeah, in your typical mix of ag and woods, there could be 40, 50, 60 deer living on a square mile, if not more. So
right.
It's pretty shocking to look. And I'm looking at a map right now, and outside of the coastal area of Maine, I mean, the whole north, the north 9/10, we'll call it fractionally, of the state just looks like big woods. I mean, it's all green. It looks like national forest land. There are very small towns, along your major interstates, but other than that, it just looks like wilderness up there. So I would have thought that state would have, boasted a higher deer killed per square mile reading. But nevertheless, the number of doe harvests in Maine was also pretty shocking too. 0.2. I mean, that's whew. That's one doe, Pete, out of every 5 sections. Can you imagine hunting 3,000? That's 5 sections in Illinois. That's over 3,000 acres. Can you imagine needing 3,000 acres to kill 1 doe? I mean, that's what that number suggests, and that's crazy. So shout out to the Maine guys. There must either be not a ton of people hunting in Maine, or the deer density just must be really low, and that shit must just be harder than hell to hunt in. So our number
for y'all that stick with Maine, and grind it out every year. Hey, there's something to be said about y'all.
Yeah, any one of the people on this list. So our number 1 state though kind of falls in line with number 4, which was New Hampshire. So what do you got for number 1 for me, brother?
Number 1, Rhode Island. Which, I mean, I don't know. I'll just read what the article says, and I'll let the data speak for itself. But Unfortunately, Rhode Island's at a huge disadvantage because of its size. State residents don't have much room to hunt, and the total buck harvest for 2016
Oh, Jesus.
was 951.
That's it. Didn't even touch 1K. Man.
And it gets into Texas harvests right here. At 300, just say 400,000.
Yeah,
Just say
399.
400,000.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You put those two together, yeah, it's hard to make a case for Rhode Island being a good hunting state. 951 deer were killed in 2000. That's insane. What makes it even harder is the fact Rhode Island hunters only shot 0.9 bucks per square mile.
So less than 1 buck a section, which is, again, still sounds so low to me even.
Right. There is good news for Rhode Island, though, which is that they had a big jump not too long ago. 2015, hunters only harvested 762 bucks, so a 25% improvement. Definitely, noteworthy. It's not easy to determine which states are truly the worst or the best states for deer hunting, but consistent trends tend to paint a clear picture. However, most states face some kind of negative trend. Iowa, Kentucky, Kansas, New Jersey, South Carolina, and Pennsylvania all produced mature bucks, but several of them have seen drops in numbers from year to year. And like they say here, the ever fluctuating number of hunters out there, and Kansas and, Iowa and, the draw states, you would expect to see some drops, year to year based off, non-residents drawing tags. Because, you're going to have your core group of hunters, so to speak. And then, you'll just have off years with, your non-residents, because I would like to, here in, a year or whenever the data for last year comes out, and we can kind of sort of, pick and choose the states that are draw states or, hard for non-residents to hunt or however, due to COVID last year, I would like to see how that impacted the states that really kind of do lean more heavily on non-resident hunters coming in and impacting their harvest numbers.
Yep. I think I have some interesting data to share with you here because I've been thinking about this PSM and I'm thinking like, okay, what would Illinois be? What would an Illinois and Iowa be? So I have the data here. It took me a little bit of doing, but I've been working on it since you were kind of talking about Rhode Island there. So last year in Illinois, there were 163,000 bucks total deer harvested. So 163,000. In Illinois, there are roughly 58,000 square miles. So if you take 163 divided by 50, we'll call it 58,000 square miles, that's about 3.0. So in Illinois, you're definitely a top 5 perennial powerhouse of deer hunting. In my opinion, and I feel like in a lot of other people's opinions as well, it's about at that 3 deer per square mile number. If you look at the entire state, which, a large majority of unhuntable land is in the Chicagoland area, which is very huge, very vast. There's quite a bit of square mileage in Illinois that is just not huntable just because of the Chicagoland metropolitan area. However, I thought that was interesting to kind of take a look at, to kind of give you guys an idea of what Illinois' per square mile deer harvest number would be. So if you take a look at, Rhode Island at 0.9 and you take a look at Maine with 0.5, that roughly means that it is, 6 times harder to find a deer in Maine than it is in Illinois, and about 3 or 3.5 times harder to find a deer in Rhode Island as it is in Illinois. So that's a pretty interesting kind of thing to figure out there and kind of see. So
right.
I wonder what it is in Illinois. Square miles in. Let's take a look at Louisiana. Square miles in Louisiana is currently, it's pretty close to Illinois actually. It's 52,000 square miles. And let me just look up the number of deer killed in Louisiana last year. Okay. So Louisiana, it says about 490,000 deer in 2017. Okay. So we're going to just go with 500,000. It's between all these numbers that I'm seeing here between 450 and 625. So we'll just go with the 500,000. So we'll take 500 and we'll divide it by, roughly 50. Holy shit, Pete. That's 10. I would not have expected the harvest number to be that high per square mile. 10 deer per square mile. That's that in of itself, Pete, doesn't that make you think, holy shit, Louisiana, that should have an argument to be on this list if, roughly 10 deer are getting taken out per square mile. That's a lot of deer to be taken out in comparison to like a state like Illinois. That's kind of interesting. What are your thoughts on that as a Louisiana resident?
A lot of that's going to have to do with our tag numbers. In Louisiana, you get six deer tags. You get 3 doe tags, 2 buck tags, and 1 either or tag. So that, and average person here, they kill. They're going to kill their 6 deer.
Wow.
And then most people down here, hunting is kind of a family thing. So if you look at typical household in Louisiana is 4 people. So you've got, 24 deer for that family to kill. I'm not saying everybody does it. Obviously not.
Right.
And then our deer population density, I think it still sits. Hang on. I read that article the other day. Yeah, here we go right here. Our top 5 parishes for deer density are East Carroll and Tensas, and Madison Parish. They're all northern parishes, so you're starting to get towards, the Tensas River in that area, which, that's still, Tensas Parish is still, you hear about it, you'll read articles about, these Tensas giants that are killed every year. There is a huge deer killed in Tensas Parish. You're up there around the border of Arkansas, big woods in that area. Some of the prettiest hardwood bottoms and hardwood flats I've ever seen in my life are in that area. And then West Baton Rouge, which is, you have East and West Baton Rouge Parish. West Baton Rouge Parish holds a pretty decent amount of deer. And then West Feliciana Parish. And so you're talking, of course, this article was written 7 years ago. But still, as somebody that reads the articles and, stays kind of active, silently active in the forums, that's where most of your deer are. You notice my home parish of Sabine Parish was nowhere on that list, even though we don't get the attention. The research probably isn't done because, year before last, a really good family friend of mine, they killed, between 3 of them, they all killed deer over the 140-inch mark. Now they're a huge management operation. I mean, they don't even look at a buck until he's 5.5 years old. And even then, hey, you're hunting a 5.5-year-old deer, they still grow, up to that 6.5, 7.5. And I know for a fact, they have a buck that will be 9.5 years old this year. So it's kind of that thing of our harvest numbers. I'm not going to say are inflated, but there's just parts of the state where there's way more deer, period, population wise. So in those areas, more deer get killed. I mean, that's, plain and simply put, because we don't have antler restrictions. If deer's got antlers, it's a buck. And a lot of people down here, I don't hate on it. Hey, a lot of people down here love eating deer meat. I'm with them. I
Yep.
understand it. I don't kill 6 deer. I do my best to take mature bucks and mature does if I need it. But I'm still kind of shocked that our numbers are that high. So we're a better deer killing state than even Illinois.
That's right. Deer killing for sure. The per square mile measurement certainly higher than Illinois at roughly 3.5, 4. I mean, if you guys are all the way up there at 10 deer per square mile, so I mean I feel like that would be an interesting thing to see, done similarly to the study that we took a look at last week in episode 107. I feel like that'd be some really interesting data to kind of throw in a spreadsheet and see how it worked out to see, what the highest number of deer per square mile killed was. And there's a lot of varying factors that take place here when we're talking about that. There's a lot of places, I feel like one of the reasons in Illinois where we have a smaller amount of deer than you would suspect harvested is just because of the huge amount of private land in Illinois. And Illinois is about 98% comprised of private land, which means, if you're not going on an outfitted hunt, if you don't have permission to be on a property that's owned by somebody else or own your own property, then basically you're shit out of luck and you're not hunting,
Right.
because public is just so few and far between here. So that's kind of interesting. Any other thoughts now that we've seen both lists? We've seen, the list from last week, which we're talking about the deer numbers killed and the licenses sold. And this week we're talking about a varying plate of factors that kind of influence the scales. Have your thoughts changed? Do you think Florida is still your number one pick for the hardest state to kill a deer in, or have your thoughts changed?
I still think Florida. I still think my gut instinct was correct with Florida, but I think I didn't look at the big picture of the super small New England states that, number one, just don't have the population because they don't have the acreage to, hold a population of deer like we have or like y'all have. Or
Yep. Pretty interesting. Oop, I dropped him. Son of a gun, Pete. Give him a call back here real quick. Nope, there he is. Dropped you for a second there. No biggie.
Yeah, we're back.
We're back. So getting back into it, you were talking about how, the argument could kind of be made the same across all those smaller New England states. The area of the states are just so small in nature that the harvest numbers kind of mirror that, and they're small as well. So would you rather hunt, I guess, regionally, if we're kind of banding all the New England states together as, really hard places to hunt? I think personally the eastern Midwest, I'll call it, your Ohio, your Pennsylvania, your Michigan, I think those are three pretty hard places to hunt, especially on public land, just because there is quite a bit of it in those states. Would you rather hunt in that east Midwest, that southeast area, kind of like by where you are, or that northeast area comprised of those smaller states?
I think for me, I would still rather hunt the eastern Midwest. Just personally, just simply on the fact of the caliber of deer that come from that area every year. You you seriously have opportunity if you put in the time, you put in the seat time in the stand. You truly have the opportunity to kill the deer of a lifetime. And I'm not saying that you don't here in the Southeast or that you don't, in the Northeast. It's just, it happens much more frequently in the Eastern Midwest, especially, you look at Pennsylvania and you look at Ohio, those areas just, it just happens there,
Mm-hmm.
every year. And to the
Yep.
guys that do grind it out and do find success in that area every year, I mean, I tip my hat to them, because that's just a massive amount of area, it's the proverbial needle in a haystack, so to speak. But for me, that's what I would rather do. I
Sure.
would I would rather chase the Eastern Midwest, giants myself.
Yeah, I can definitely see the allure of that coming from, I mean, numbers don't lie. There's big deer in every state, but there's, it's no secret that, your biggest bucks are going to come from the Illinois, Iowas, Wisconsins, Missouris. There's a lot of giants being pulled out of, Kentucky as of late, I feel. I feel like Indiana, personally, our neighbor directly to the east here, I feel like that's kind of a sleeper state that not a lot of people talk about. I also feel like eastern Nebraska is a really good sleeper state for big whitetails, and as is Oklahoma. I feel like those would be on my top 3 list of big sleeper states for whitetails. Minnesota, there's giants that come out of Minnesota as well, but
Right.
so
Oklahoma here is probably the closest state for chasing that true. I hate to use the word trophy. I do. You know that I don't use the word trophy, but
yep.
To chase the true trophy deer, Oklahoma is a state. Many guys from here, I know. I can't even count how many guys I know that lease land in Oklahoma from just here in my hometown that hunt Oklahoma and have very good success. One of them is my first cousin that I do video and stuff with, and they have. I mean, they truly have some great whitetail deer in that area. So I agree with that. Oklahoma kind of is that southwestern sleeper state for many people.
Yeah, I feel like Texas is really, the sportsman's paradise of the Southwest. And if you look at the Midwest, the kingpin of deer hunting, I think, is probably going to be in that Iowa, Illinois, maybe in the conversation, but I still think it's probably Iowa. I think in that, eastern Midwest area, you got a really strong argument for Ohio or Pennsylvania,
Right.
being the kingpins there, and they're down in the Southeast. I don't know who would be the best deer hunting state in the Southeast, if you would lump Kentucky into being in the Southeast, or if you'd be kind of that central Midwest with Kentucky. But that's a hell of a good state to hunt in. And
Right. If we count Kentucky, then Kentucky's definitely going to be the mecca. If we don't, then
Georgia.
I would go Alabama.
Really, what would make you say Alabama?
There's huge deer killed in Alabama every year, and there's a lot of outfitting that happens in Alabama as well. I think a lot of people, whenever they think outfitted hunts in the South, Texas,
Yep.
Oklahoma is probably always going to take everybody's mind over for being one of the top outfitted states, but there is a lot of really good outfitters in Alabama. Now, they don't. Okay, I'm trying to think of how to say this. They don't have the deer like what you see in Texas in the pens and in the high fences,
Mm-hmm.
like Texas. But I know of at least a handful of outfits that kill 170 plus inch, 5 or 6 170 plus inch deer every year.
That's pretty impressive.
So and I know some guys that hunt either private ground or public ground in Alabama that find pretty good success, what I would call pretty good success, chasing that upper echelon of deer in Alabama. Georgia is just one of those states. I always say Georgia is a lot like Louisiana, in that your average hunter, you know, if we have, 110 or 120-inch deer on camera, we've got a freaking monster on camera.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's parts of Georgia where they don't start to draw that line until you get that 150 plus inch mark. I don't look at inches. I look at the age of a deer, and if it's a deer that I'm going to be tickled to wrap my tag around, then hey, that's the deer I'm here to hunt.
Sure. Yeah.
But for some people, and I don't, hey, I don't hate, but for some people, that caliber of deer does exist in parts of Georgia, but to the average hunter in Georgia, it definitely doesn't.
I wonder if that's a result of private land ownership or wealth, ability to hunt at an outfitter or what that is.
That's going to be a lot of it. And then, Georgia is a pretty big timber state, kind of like Louisiana is. So you're going to have stretches of years where habitat is continuously improving, followed by years of terrible habitat, terrible browse, terrible tree mass. And then, it's kind of like an endless cycle. That's what.
Yeah.
My grandfather, which this, he retired from the state of Louisiana. He was a game warden for, I think, 32 years, and he always would tell me that he wished that I could have hunted whenever deer season first opened in Louisiana down here before the timber companies took over, because the very first deer my grandfather ever killed, I've put a tape to it, even though it's been chewed on by rats and everything else. He killed a 137-inch deer the very first year that deer season was open. And, that was back, you're talking just a handful of years post the Great Depression. So to him, it was just more meat. He didn't even care about it having antlers.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
that was what we had before the timber industry came in and took all I'm not going to say all the great land for growing hardwoods, but took a lot of it and turned it into pine trees. And pine trees just don't grow deer like ag does up in the Midwest.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And most deer, they would prefer to browse on something other than a pine tree when it comes in the first place anyway. So that kind of wraps us up with this one. Any last thoughts on the worst state to deer hunt in, Pete?
Oh, I don't have any. Are you still sticking with Michigan?
I think from all accounts of the things that I've heard, read, watched, listened to, I think that Michigan is one of the most rigorous states to hunt on public land for deer. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the worst state or most difficult state, but I think if you're a public land hunter in Michigan, hats off to you. I think that's a pretty hard state to hunt in. But if you're hunting, generally speaking, in the southeast where it's extremely hot, deer density is low, or in the northeast where your state is smaller, the deer density is low, hats off to you as well for getting it done, because I feel like that southeast region, that northeast region, and specifically on a couple of these midwestern or eastern Midwest states, your Ohio's, Pennsylvania's, Michigan's, that just have a large amount of public land that get beat real hard during deer season. If you're a deer hunter that's continuously getting it done in any one of those three areas, hats off to you. So it's hard to narrow down one, but yeah, I would still keep Michigan as my top pick with maybe. I was interested in the Wisconsin thing, the contingency of it having killed lots of immature deer in 2016 when we looked at the data there. So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, I'd still probably stick with Michigan. Would you still stick with Florida?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with Florida. I am. Kind of, flip side of the same coin for what you're saying in Michigan. It's kind of the opposite in Florida. You don't you don't have the acreage to hold deer, on top of you already have a poor population. And then, as we kind of made the correlation of, the severe storms impacting. And that was another piece of data that I wanted to get into. The invasive species that are slowly taking over Florida, especially the southern part of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's been recorded. Those Burmese pythons, which Florida has a greater population of than almost anywhere else in the wild. They've got to be feeding on deer pretty heavily, you would think.
Mm-hmm.
But so I'm gonna stick with Florida. I don't, that'll be my code text to you if I ever get kidnapped. Is, hey, I'm hunting in Florida. just go ahead and call 911 because I need help.
Sure. Alrighty. Well, thanks for joining me for part 2, buddy. And I will talk to you soon. And till then, I will. I'll chat at you later, brother.
All right, buddy. Thanks for having me on, man.
No problemo. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Bye. So again, another really good conversation in this one. Kind of looking at some different spreads of data this time, rather than just the harvest to license numbers ratio. A couple things before we get done here, though. This Saturday, we are launching our hand fishing film. So we've got a ton of catches in this one. Last year, Jesse filmed Matt catch over 10 flatheads. So lots of catches, really action-packed, lots of big fish in this one. And that's episode number 2 of our season that's going to be dropping this fall. And we have 16 other episodes rolling out after that to check out. So if you came to the launch party, you got to see 3 or 4 of those episodes. So there are a lot more where that came from. And if you have not yet become a part of our Facebook group, The Last Breath Inner Circle, you should definitely check that out. Like I said, we've got a really nice discount for Badlands gear. It's 30%. It's pretty substantial. And another 25% off Outdoor Edge gear. So if you're looking to get yourself into a really nice, really user-friendly, easy-to-use knife with a replaceable blade, check out OutdoorEdge.com and use the code LBTV25. Thank you again for everybody that came out to the launch party. Again, Hand Fish and Film launching on Saturday. Big congrats to our guests and award winners, which were Austin Meyer, Clark Cummings, and Bennett Glessner. And we will see you again next Monday for some more whitetail content when Garrett and I sit down and start breaking open some more controversial topics for you guys. Till then, don't waste it.